My husband and I were walking in the Woodland Cemetery when we noticed the Pierce family lot with a blank stone. Next to it was a stone labeled Mary Mason, wife of Franklin Pierce. Is that the Franklin Pierce, President of the United States? It wasn't. Writing about historical women is challenging. In older United States newspapers, women typically appear with their husband's name preceded by Mrs. Even their family members sometimes struggled as they wrote an obituary. One woman, for example, was remembered mainly because she was excellent at crochet and afghan making. Mary H. Mason Pierce's obituary wasn't much better. The family felt the most memorable thing about her was she made a wide circle of friends and was well and favorably known and most highly respected. Being so well known and loved, she should appear often in the society pages of the local newspapers. She is mentioned a few times, such as when she was in charge of the tree for the Christmas gathering of the Universalist Sunday School in Nashua. Gifts were distributed from a heavily laden tree that, being lighted with wax tapers, was brilliant in the extreme. Mrs. Franklin Pierce was chairman of the committee in this department, and to her good taste the success is in a great measure due. There was not enough to tell her story. To do that, we need to look at the people who helped shape her life. Mason family heritage. The earliest known Mason family member arrived in the Massachusetts Bay Colony around 1649. Sampson Mason was surrounded by Puritans, and 2 of his infants were baptized into the faith, but it is believed Sampson joined the Baptist Church. Still, the Puritan beliefs probably influenced the Mason home life as they did the laws and customs of Massachusetts. While husbands were the head of the household and providers for the family, the women were in charge of the family assets and the children. Education was a moral duty, and heads of household were required to make sure all, including servants and females, were taught to read and write so they could read the Bible for themselves, and the Bible taught that work was ordained of God. 6 generations later, Mary H. Mason was probably raised to be a proper young lady with the same values that had shaped her community since its Puritan foundation. She was born in 1848 in Fall River, Massachusetts, and at the time was the youngest of 6 children. Her father was a tailor and had real estate worth $3,000. In 1850, the family employed an Irish maid to help around the house, an indication of comfortable means. As Mary grew older, she would have been expected to help with household chores, to help care for her younger brothers and sisters, and to take care of her own clothes. Depending on her mother's preferences, Mary may have helped with meal preparation. The Irish girl was probably the first to get up in the morning to light the fire in the kitchen and put water on to boil. She also probably cleaned the lamps every day and filled them with whale oil and did the weekly laundry. But while Mary's family was comfortably well off, her grandfather, William Mason, was rich. He reportedly owned $13,650 in real estate, and when he died in 1859, his estate was valued at $115,942,050, worth over $4.25 million in 2023. After his father's passing, Jeremiah appears to have given up the tailoring business and become a gentleman, claiming to have $15,000 of real estate and $5,000 worth of personal goods. But that was not quite true. Inheritance and expectations. While William Mason left inheritances to his daughters, quote, to be held by her, to her sole and separate use free from the interference or control of her husband, unquote, and after all the bequests, the remainder of the estate was divided between his sons Christopher and Alan. It seems William did not trust his son Jeremiah with money and left him with the use of the house on Main Street and the building and lot on Market Square, and income from 10 shares of Pocasset Bank and 12 shares of Fall River Manufacturing Company. Upon Jeremiah's death and the death of his wife, the assets were to be divided among their children. While Jeremiah was now wealthy in a sense, his 2 oldest children were employed, Julia as a dressmaker and Abby as a milliner, both occupations the women could perform in their home. They probably started working before Jeremiah received his inheritance to contribute to the household income, which was typical of the time. Surprisingly, their 21-year-old brother William did not have an occupation in 1860, but he had inherited a woodlot from his grandfather, which would have been an easy source of cash. Jeremiah also inherited half a pew in the Baptist church. He had probably been raised in this church, and his children had probably also attended. Mary had expectations of inheriting some of her grandfather's money, but with 7 living siblings and an 8th on the way, they weren't great expectations. But unlike their 2 oldest sisters, Mary aged 22 and her sisters Lydia aged 26, Jane aged 24, and Josephine aged 20, were not expected to contribute to the family income and did not seek employment before their marriages. Meeting Franklin Pierce. So how did Mary, living in Fall River, and Franklin Pierce, living in Nashua, New Hampshire, meet, court, and marry? Marriage was crucial for women like Mary. Even with her inheritance, she likely could not maintain her own household and would have wanted to avoid mill work. Without marriage, her only other option would have been to live with a sibling. So when Franklin came courting, Mary probably adjusted her age, since men traditionally married younger women, and Mary was about 1.5 years older than Franklin. Mary added a year to her birth date, so they were the same age when they married in October of 1875. Franklin probably never knew or decided to continue the deception after Mary's death. The informant's name is not on Mary's death record, but it was probably a family member, and most likely it was her husband. The death record and her gravestone list her birth date as February 24th, 1849. However, Mary was born on February 24th, 1848. The 1850, 1860, and 1870 censuses all confirm the earlier date. The Pierce family and social class. Franklin also came from a prosperous family. In 1860, his father Thomas Pierce was the postmaster of Bedford, New Hampshire, with real estate worth $18,000 and personal property worth $1,600.36. Following New England Protestant tradition, Thomas probably expected his children to work. His daughter Julia was employed as a domestic servant, likely in her father's household. In 1868, Thomas helped found the Nashua Card and Glazed Paper Company. Franklin attended school in Manchester, New Hampshire, and later Appleton Academy in New Ipswich, Massachusetts. Afterwards, he joined his father's dry goods business and then entered the paper company his father led, learning papermaking in all its details. By 1872, Franklin was working as a correspondent for the Nashua Card and Glazed Paper Company and served as a clerk of the corporation, responsible for recording the board's minutes. Courtship and marriage. So how did Mary and Franklin meet? Fall River was famous for its textile mills, home to 33 mills by 1876. Nashua, too, had textile and paper industries. Franklin may have traveled to Fall River to purchase fiber for the papermaking company. Short cotton fibers, known as linters, and mill discards like flax and rags were essential for producing certain grades of paper. Franklin and Mary, being of the same social class, likely met through social circles connected to these industries. Mary would have dressed fashionably, perhaps in buttoned kid leather shoes and a bustle-back dress. For evening events, she would have worn silk and slippers, for daily wear, cotton or wool. Her corset gave her the expected hourglass figure, and her ability to play the piano or pianoforte would have marked her as a woman of refinement. In 1875, Thomas Pierce built a large and elegant dwelling house with the intention of having his children and their families live with him. Mary and Franklin lived at the 18 Orange Square family home in Nashua for several years before moving into their own home around 1879. Though probably raised Baptist, Mary attended the Universalist Church with her husband and in-laws. Later life and death. In 1887, Franklin became president of the Holyoke Card and Paper Company, and the couple moved to Springfield, Hampton, Massachusetts. When Franklin became seriously ill, they returned to Nashua in 1899 to consult with Dr. E. F. McQuestion. They had been in town for several weeks when Mary developed an intestinal obstruction and died. Like most married women of her class, Mary was expected to leave the workforce and focus on her home, husband, children, and good works in her community. She likely employed a work girl, probably a day laborer, to assist with cleaning and cooking, but those chores were easier than when Mary had married. Her home most likely had running water, gas, electricity, a sewer system, and a refrigerator. Laundry, one of the hardest household chores, was probably sent out. Mary and Franklin appear to have had a good marriage, but they had no children. Mary wrote her will about 3 months before her death, leaving Franklin all her personal belongings and a lifetime income from her property. After his death, $1,000 would go to her nephew, Frank Pierce Weaver, and the remainder divided among her 5 sisters. Mary was buried in the Pierce family plot alongside her in-laws, their daughter Julia, and great-granddaughter Helen Whitney. Beside her lies a blank gravestone which has been waiting over 100 years for Franklin, who remarried and was buried in Canada.